That is the question whispered across 10,000 years of darkness. A question so ancient, so heavy, that even the bravest minds hesitate to speak it aloud. Because the moment you ask it, you begin to feel the weight of an existence far older than empires, far older than war, far older than humanity itself. You begin to sense a presence, quiet, watching, patient. A mind that has followed humanity through every rise, every collapse, every act of cruelty and every moment of brilliance. A mind that has shaped our species like a silent author writing a story across 40,000 years. Before the Imperium, before Terra was ruled by kings, before humanity even knew the meaning of fear, there was him, not a man born from flesh, not a child delivered into a world of doubt, but a being forged from the final breath of thousands of ancient psychers, men and women who, sensing the first corrupt whispers of the warp, sacrificed their own lives to create a single entity capable of guiding humanity through the storms of eternity. Their souls merged into one consciousness, forming a being who remembered all of humanity's past and foresaw all of its possible futures. A being who would walk the earth as a silent guardian for millennia. He was known by many names through the ages. A prophet, a healer, a scientist, a king, a wanderer, a myth whispered in the tongues of forgotten civilizations. But in truth, he was none of those things. And he was all of them. Because the emperor of mankind did not simply live through history, he shaped it. Quietly, patiently, without fanfare or recognition, while humanity fought, starved, slaughtered, discovered, and destroyed itself, he remained a constant presence, nudging events the way a master chess player adjusts pieces long before the opponent realizes the board has changed. He did not seek worship. He did not demand obedience. He did not crave power. He sought only one thing: humanity's survival. And so, for thousands of years, he walked among his own species as a nameless figure, never aging, never falling, never revealing the truth of his origin. Empires rose and vanished. Languages evolved and died. Gods were born and forgotten. Through all of this, he watched in silence, studying mankind's strengths and weaknesses, waiting for the moment when he would need to reveal himself completely. That moment would not come until humanity stood on the edge of extinction, a fractured, terrified species scattered across the stars during the Age of Strife. Warp storms raged. Civilizations were cut off from one another. Mutants, psychers, warlords, and Xenos predators tore humanity apart. It was the closest mankind had ever come to collapsing into permanent darkness. And that was when the Emperor finally stepped forward. Not as a myth, not as a whisper, but as a force so overwhelming, so absolute, that even the most broken human worlds felt hope ignite for the first time in centuries. But before the galaxy feared him, before gods trembled at his awakening, the Emperor existed as a silent watcher, an immortal being walking through the ages, carrying the collective weight of humanity's eternal future. And this is where his power truly begins. For most of human history, the Emperor was nothing more than a shadow passing through the background of civilization. A traveler whose footsteps left no prints in the sand, yet whose presence shifted the course of kingdoms. While humanity stumbled through its early ages, fighting wars for land, for belief, for power, he watched with a patience that no mortal could ever possess. Because he did not measure time in years or dynasties. He measured it in the rise and fall of entire eras. There were moments when the fate of a nation hinged on a single decision, a single invention, a single leader, and each time, he was there, gently turning the tide. Sometimes as a philosopher whispering ideas that would ignite revolutions of thought. Sometimes as a healer whose knowledge of biology was centuries ahead of its time. Sometimes as a warrior who appeared on battlefields long enough to ensure a victory that would ripple through the next millennium. He took no credit for these deeds. He wanted none. His purpose was not to rule, but to guide. He saw humanity's cruelty, our constant hunger for conquest, our ability to destroy ourselves with terrifying creativity. But he also saw our potential, our brilliance, our capacity for unity, if only we had a hand strong enough to hold us together. And so he walked among us, shaping us from the shadows, preventing disasters long before anyone understood how close the species had come to annihilation. When an ancient tyrant sought to conquer the world, he influenced the minds of those who resisted, giving them the resolve to stand firm. When a disease threatened to wipe out entire continents, he intervened quietly, easing the spread through knowledge only he possessed. His actions were never recognized by history, but their effects echoed through every age. Occasionally, he would take a direct role, becoming a ruler in some forgotten empire, bringing centuries of peace and advancement before vanishing without explanation. Legends would spring up around him, tales of a king who never aged, a warrior who never bled, a sage who knew the secrets of the universe. These myths traveled across cultures, across continents, until his identity blurred into thousands of unrelated stories. Yet all of them pointed to the same mysterious figure who arrived precisely when humanity needed him most. But even as the Emperor guided mankind through its ancient years, he understood something terrifying: humanity's greatest trials had not yet begun. The universe was far more dangerous than the people of ancient Terra could ever imagine. Beyond the stars waited horrors that could twist minds, devour worlds, and extinguish species. And in the immaterial realm of the warp, entities older than time watched humanity grow with growing interest, gods of chaos and madness who would one day try to claim mankind's soul. The Emperor knew these threats long before humanity looked toward the heavens. He knew that when the time came, he would need to stand openly as humanity's protector, no longer a hidden guardian. But until that moment arrived, he continued to shape events from behind the curtain, building the foundations of the future Imperium brick by brick, generation by generation. He was the quiet architect of human destiny, a guide whose influence stretched across continents and centuries, a presence that shaped the species long before it ever knew it needed shaping. This was the Emperor before he became a god, a silent force, a hidden watcher, a guardian preparing for a war the rest of humanity could not yet comprehend. Humanity's darkest age did not begin with an enemy. It began with isolation. When the warp storms swallowed the galaxy during the Age of Strife, mankind's worlds, once united by technology and ambition, were severed from one another like islands lost in a raging cosmic ocean. Civilizations collapsed under the weight of fear and madness. Psychic mutations erupted everywhere. Warlords crowned themselves kings of ruined empires. Xeno's predators feasted on defenseless colonies. Entire sectors vanished into silence. Humanity stood on the edge of extinction. And that was when the Emperor finally stepped out of the shadows. For thousands of years, he had guided mankind with a gentle, unseen hand. But now, subtlety was no longer enough. The galaxy burned, and humanity needed a leader powerful enough to reforge an entire species. When he emerged from Terra, it was not as a wanderer or philosopher, but as a figure whose presence bent reality itself. Every soldier who saw him felt their fear dissolve. Every psyker felt the warp recoil. Every enemy felt an instinctive terror ignite deep within their bones. He came with a vision: to reunite all of humanity under one banner, the banner of the Imperium. Not for glory, not for conquest, but for survival. An empire united by science, reason, and the belief that humanity must stand as one if it hoped to survive the horrors lurking in the galaxy. But his power alone could not reclaim the stars. He needed armies. He needed generals. He needed sons, beings crafted with such perfection that they could lead entire legions. And so the Emperor forged the Primarchs, 20 demigods born from his genetic hand. Each one was destined to command a legion of superhuman warriors, each one a reflection of a part of his own unmatched brilliance. But before he could raise them, chaos intervened. The ruinous powers, sensing what the Emperor was building, reached out from the warp and stole the Primarchs, scattering them across distant worlds. The Emperor found these worlds in time, but the loss forced him to accelerate his work. To fill the void left by the stolen Primarchs, he created the Space Marines, Astartes crafted from the genetic echo of their absent fathers. With his legions assembled, his armies armed, and his purpose burning like a golden flame, the Emperor launched the greatest military campaign in human history, the Great Crusade. It was more than a march of armies. It was a storm of liberation sweeping across the galaxy. World after world fell under the Imperium's light. Some welcomed reunion, others resisted fiercely, but all of them were transformed. The Emperor moved across the stars like a force of nature, a being whose psychic presence could silence rebellions, inspire loyalty, and crush resistance without lifting a single weapon. Entire systems surrendered at the first whisper of his arrival. Even hostile Xenos races hesitated to stand against him, sensing a power that dwarfed anything they had ever encountered. Yet despite his overwhelming strength, the Emperor did not revel in battle. He preferred diplomacy when possible, science when practical, and force only when necessary. His purpose was not to rule through fear, but to unify through progress. Worlds ravaged by darkness found themselves rebuilt. Civilizations lost to chaos were uplifted. Knowledge long forgotten was restored. But even as humanity celebrated the dawn of a new golden age, the Emperor understood a truth that no one else could see: the greatest threat to his dream did not come from alien empires, or mutant warlords, or ancient horrors sleeping beneath dead suns. It came from within, because the Chaos Gods had not stopped with the theft of the Primarchs. They watched the Emperor's every move. They whispered corruptions across the galaxy. And they waited for the moment when they could strike at the heart of his greatest work. But for now, the Emperor pressed forward, unstoppable, undeniable, and unmatched. The Great Crusade had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same again. To speak of the Emperor's power is to speak of something far beyond strength, beyond intelligence, beyond any mortal understanding of the mind. The word psyker barely begins to describe what he was. Human psykers strained to lift objects with their minds. The Emperor shaped the fate of an entire species. Some can sense emotions. The Emperor felt the shifting tides of the warp across star systems. Where others hear whispers from beyond reality, he heard the roars of gods and silenced them with a thought. His psychic abilities were not talent, they were a force of nature. Throughout the Great Crusade, his presence alone altered the battlefield. Soldiers who marched beside him felt their strength multiply, their fear dissolve, their resolve sharpen. Enemies facing him experienced the opposite: crippling dread, confusion, a sense of being watched by something vast and unknowable. He did not need to unleash waves of psychic destruction, though he could. His mere proximity bent the emotions and wills of millions. But the true scale of his power was revealed in ways few understood. He could guide entire fleets through the warp without navigators, feeling currents and storms like a sailor reading wind and tide. His mind could reach across solar systems, touching distant worlds as if they were within arm's length. He could erase memories from civilizations, purging thoughts that would one day imperil the species. He shaped reality not through brute force, but through absolute mastery of the immaterial. Scholars whispered that the Emperor did not simply wield psychic power, he defined its limits. He understood the warp better than any mortal, better even than many demons. His thoughts could silence warp entities. His voice could banish horrors that fed on suffering and madness. A single command spoken with his full will could tear a hole through the veil separating reality from nightmare. There are records, fragmentary, half erased, of the Emperor reversing disasters that should have consumed entire worlds. Warp storms collapsing into calm at his command. Psykers driven mad from exposure to demonic influence brought back from insanity with a single touch. Anomalies that would have shattered planets stabilized by his focused thought. The most terrifying thing about his power was not how destructive it could be. It was how completely he controlled it. Where other psykers risked possession with every invocation, the Emperor walked through the warp as a god among shadows. Demons fled from his presence. Corruption recoiled from his will. For him, the warp was a tool, dangerous, yes, but one he mastered so utterly that even the Chaos Gods despised and feared him long before he openly opposed them. And yet, for all his overwhelming strength, the Emperor never used the full extent of his power unless absolutely necessary. He understood that the galaxy was a fragile tapestry. Too much force could warp destiny itself. Too much intervention could unravel the natural progression of humanity's growth. So he held back. He chose precision over destruction, purpose over dominance, guidance over overwhelming force. But make no mistake, behind his restraint lay a being capable of unmaking reality with a single sustained thought. A being whose psychic might overshadowed every human who lived, every psyker ever born, and every Primarch he later created. The Emperor of mankind was not simply powerful. He was the pinnacle of human potential, the embodiment of psychic supremacy, a mind vast enough to reshape the future of the galaxy through sheer will. And yet, this was only the beginning of what he could truly do. To understand the Emperor's true power, one must step into a realm that no mortal mind is meant to comprehend, the warp. A dimension of thought, emotion, nightmares, and gods. A place where reality bends to will, where fear takes shape, where hatred becomes claws and teeth. For psykers, the warp is a source of power but also a death sentence. A single misstep can mean possession, madness, or annihilation. But for the Emperor, the warp was his domain. Where others were prey, he was a hunter. Where others heard whispers, he heard the truth. Where others were consumed, he walked untouched. The warp recognized him long before humanity understood its own psychic potential. Demons felt his presence like flame upon their skin, pure, searing, absolute. They were creatures born from human emotion, yet the Emperor was a being whose mind encompassed the entire breadth of human experience. He was not one emotion. He was all of them, perfectly controlled. And that made him something the Chaos Gods had never encountered before, a being of order in a realm of pure chaos. There were moments during the Great Crusade, rare, mostly erased from official history, when the Emperor entered the warp in his true form. Not physically, but as a presence of impossible magnitude. When he did, stars flickered. Warp tides shifted. Demons fled in blind panic. His silhouette burned brighter than any demon prince, and his will was a blade sharper than anything forged in physical space. He spoke the language of the warp fluently. He understood its laws. He bent its nature. He shaped it like a sculptor shapes clay. This mastery is most clearly seen in 3 unbelievable feats. Even the Emperor's mastery over the warp, as vast and terrifying as it was, would not have been enough to achieve his ultimate goal, the unification and salvation of humanity. For that, he needed more than legions of men. He needed sons, warriors who could not simply follow orders, but embody his will, his vision, and his power. He needed beings who were simultaneously human and something greater. And so, from the secret crucible of his genetic laboratories, he began the greatest act of creation in human history, the forging of the Primarchs. Each Primarch was not born in the conventional sense. Each was crafted with precision, each strand of their DNA imbued with the Emperor's own genius, foresight, and potential. They were more than perfect soldiers, they were superhuman generals, philosophers, and leaders in one. Every Primarch reflected an aspect of the Emperor himself: courage, intellect, cunning, fury, loyalty, and, most importantly, the capacity to carry the burden of entire worlds. But even the Emperor could not fully protect his work from the eyes of the Chaos Gods. During the gestation of the Primarchs, the ruinous powers, sensing the magnitude of what he was creating, reached out from the warp and scattered them across the galaxy. Each Primarch was hurled to a distant, often hostile world, stripped of their memory, raised by the circumstances of survival rather than design. Some grew as kings, some as tyrants, some as outcasts. Each was a seed of potential, yet shaped by the worlds that claimed them. The Emperor's heartbreak in this moment cannot be overstated. Imagine creating perfection, only to see it stolen before it could walk freely. Yet, this scattering also became part of his plan. By allowing the Primarchs to grow in the crucible of the galaxy itself, he ensured that their strength was tempered by adversity. They would be more than his reflections, they would be humanity's champions, forged in reality, not in laboratory isolation. When the Emperor finally reunited with each Primarch, he did more than embrace a son. He faced a mirror of his own greatness, magnified and sharpened. Each reunion was a revelation: a mind as powerful as his own, a spirit as unyielding as his will, and a loyalty born from awe, fear, and shared destiny. From these unions, he would raise the legions that would carry humanity across the stars, the Space Marines. Yet even in creation, the Emperor's work was not unchallenged. The Chaos Gods, watching these demigods, realized they could not destroy them outright. Instead, they whispered, corrupted, and tempted. Some Primarchs would later falter, some would rebel, some would be instruments of tragedy. But none could surpass the Emperor in the purity of origin, the depth of vision, or the magnitude of purpose. The Primarchs were the apex of human potential, a testament to what the Emperor alone could conceive and craft. Through them, he would reshape a broken galaxy. Through them, his dream of a united, immortal humanity would march forward. And yet, even this incredible act of creation hinted at the limits of mortal comprehension. What kind of being must you be to create perfection, only to have it scattered to the stars? What kind of will can withstand the hatred of gods while simultaneously shaping the destiny of billions? That is the power of the Emperor, the architect of demigods, the mind that outmatches the universe itself. The creation of the Primarchs was not merely a step in the Great Crusade. It was the revelation of a god walking among men, a being whose intellect, foresight, and raw psychic might dwarfed anything humanity could hope to imagine. It was proof that the Emperor was not merely the strongest man, the greatest general, or the most brilliant scientist. He was something far beyond all of these, the absolute apex of human potential and the embodiment of mankind's ultimate protector. Even as the Great Crusade surged across the stars, and even as the Primarchs led their legions to reclaim lost human worlds, the Emperor was working on a secret project far greater than any battlefield victory or legion raised. This was not a weapon. This was not a fortress. This was a vision, a plan to free humanity from the ever-looming threat of chaos itself. He called it the Webway Project. The Webway was a hidden labyrinth of pathways, a network outside the material universe, carved through the immaterial corridors of the warp. The plan was audacious: to create a safe, human-controlled realm through which travel across the galaxy could occur without touching the warp at all. No storms, no demons, no corruption. Humanity could be free, guided safely from world to world, untouchable by the predations of gods and monsters. But the task was impossible for ordinary beings. Only the Emperor could venture into the raw currents of the warp and carve it into stable pathways. For months, possibly years, he moved through the immaterial, battling demons that surged like tides against his will. Entire legions of entities, creatures birthed from every act of human malice and fear, attacked him. Some were small and cunning, others titanic and cunningly intelligent, all recognizing the danger of a being who could walk the warp with purpose. The effort was catastrophic, unseen, and unrecorded in full. The Emperor fought alone, without the aid of his Primarchs, for this was a battle that required absolute precision of mind and soul. He bent the energy of countless psychic storms, shattering them into calm. He tore through entire demonic battalions with thought alone, obliterating beings older than stars themselves. And yet, even with all his power, the warp would not yield easily. It recoiled, whispered, and resisted every attempt at order. It was here that the Emperor's limits began to show. He was godlike, yes, but even godlike minds can strain against eternity. He pushed further than any mortal, or even most immortal, could survive. The project demanded not only intellect but unimaginable psychic exertion. Hours stretched into days, days into weeks, weeks into months. Time itself seemed to bend around his will as he forced the impossible. The Webway project would ultimately fail, but not because of a lack of power. It failed because the Emperor, for all his might, had underestimated the ruthlessness of the Chaos Gods. They saw what he was building and hurled everything they had at him in a single, coordinated onslaught. Beings of incomprehensible scale, demons who had consumed entire civilizations, surged at the Emperor. Their goal was simple: to stop him, to prevent humanity from escaping their influence, to ensure that every human soul remained prey. And he stopped them, alone. The warp screamed, realities trembled, stars themselves seemed to flicker under the psychic weight of the struggle. Yet, despite the horror, the Emperor's mind held. His will carved paths through madness. Entire armies of demons dissolved beneath him. And in that moment, for one terrifying instant, the Emperor was no longer a man. He was an unyielding axis of reality, the anchor that prevented the galaxy from unraveling into chaos. This was power beyond comprehension. Not the power to destroy worlds, or armies, or even gods. But the power to hold back the end of all things itself. Yet even here, at the apex of his might, the Emperor remained focused on a singular purpose: humanity. Every strike, every thought, every ounce of effort was for the survival of a species that, without him, would have already been devoured by its own creations and the predations of gods. The Webway project was more than ambition. It was the Emperor's declaration to the galaxy: no force, no matter how ancient, powerful, or evil, could stand against the destiny he had forged for mankind. And yet, even in victory, a shadow loomed. The war with chaos was far from over. The battle for the Webway had revealed a truth even the Emperor could not deny: the ruinous powers would never relent. They would wait, they would plot, and one day, they would strike again with everything they had. The Emperor's work was eternal. His vigilance, endless, and the galaxy, for all its freedom, would forever owe its survival to the being who dared to challenge gods themselves, and live to guide humanity through the darkness. The galaxy was not yet healed from the wounds of the Great Crusade when the Emperor faced a betrayal so profound it would shape the destiny of humanity for 10,000 years. Horus, the brightest of his sons, the War Master, chosen above all Primarchs to lead the crusade in his stead, fell to corruption. The ruinous powers whispered to him, seduced him, and transformed him into their instrument, a vessel of hatred, fury, and dark divinity. What followed was a war that would tear the Imperium from within and bring the Emperor to the brink of his own mortality. Horus was no ordinary traitor. He was a reflection of the Emperor's own power and strategy, magnified by the influence of 4 Chaos Gods. His armies were the same legions that had conquered the stars under the Emperor's guidance, now turned against their creator. Worlds that had welcomed the Imperium now burned. Civilizations that had once thrived under the Emperor's vision were reduced to ash. And through it all, Horus grew ever more formidable, drawing strength from the very gods that the Emperor had held at bay. The Emperor did not approach this battle lightly. He knew that to confront Horus was to confront the combined might of chaos itself. Every strategy, every strike, every psychic force must be measured, precise, and perfect. When the final confrontation occurred aboard Horus' flagship, the Emperor faced not only his most trusted son but the will of the ruinous powers embodied. The duel was not merely of fists or weapons, it was a collision of godlike wills. Reality itself seemed to bend under the force of their psychic struggle, the warp around them churning as if the universe itself feared the outcome. Every strike the Emperor delivered was calculated to wound, to subdue, to break the influence of chaos without destroying the son he had loved more than any other. Every defense he raised was a barrier against forces older and crueler than the material universe. And yet, even as his hand moved with divine precision, Horus fought back with fury and cunning that could have shattered any lesser being. The battle reached a terrifying climax when the Emperor, understanding that mercy could no longer prevail, struck with the full magnitude of his will. The physical destruction was immense, yet it was the psychic and spiritual conflict that defined the duel. The Emperor did not simply kill Horus, he eradicated the influence of chaos from his son in that final instant, severing the tie that bound a demigod to the pantheon of gods. But the act came at an unimaginable cost. The Emperor's body, already strained from decades of psychic exertion and the unending demands of the Great Crusade, was shattered. His mortality, previously hidden behind a facade of godlike presence, was laid bare. In that moment, the galaxy witnessed the paradox of the Emperor. He was more powerful than any being could comprehend, yet even he was vulnerable to the consequences of his own choices. The brightest of his sons, the most capable of his creations, had fallen, and the cost of stopping him nearly destroyed the Emperor entirely. Horus lay defeated, and yet the Imperium would never be the same. The betrayal of the Warmaster was a wound that would never fully heal. The shadow of Horus, rebellion spread across thousands of worlds, poisoning loyalty and faith, whispering doubt, and inviting chaos to strike in subtle and insidious ways for millennia to come. Through it all, the Emperor endured. His body was broken, his flesh withered, yet his will remained unbowed. Though confined to the brink of death, he held fast to the Imperium's survival, demonstrating a form of power that no mortal, and no god, could rival. He had faced the greatest possible betrayal, combated the most terrifying entities in existence, and emerged, albeit wounded, still as the unshakable anchor of humanity. The Horus Heresy was more than a civil war. It was a testament to the Emperor's unmatched might, the depth of his foresight, and the terrifying truth of his nature, a being capable of confronting gods and sons alike, and enduring the unimaginable to secure humanity's survival. Horus was dead, the galaxy burned, scarred by betrayal, war, and the ruinous influence of chaos. Entire civilizations had been lost, legions shattered, and yet one presence remained, unchanged in purpose, unbroken in will. The Emperor, his body shattered and interred upon the golden throne, became something more than a man. A being of flesh and spirit bound to a machine, sustaining humanity through sheer psychic might, guiding trillions across the warp with a light that could be seen from a million worlds. Though confined, his influence was absolute. The Astronomicon burned brightly, a beacon of hope and direction in a galaxy drowning in darkness. He held back demonic tides, contained the spread of chaos, and maintained the fragile unity of the Imperium. Every ship that sailed safely through the warp owed its path to him. Every soldier who fought with courage, every world that survived, every human who lived another day, all existed because the Emperor endured. And yet, there was a paradox in his power. He was both immortal and imprisoned, omnipotent and yet limited. He could destroy armies, banish gods, and shape destinies, but he could not step freely among his people. He could not correct the mistakes of men, heal the corruption within the Imperium, or fully awaken the potential he had created. His sacrifice had become a prison, and yet it was the only way humanity could survive. For 10,000 years, he has remained, silent yet ever present. Empires rise and fall around him. Tyranids devour worlds, Necrons awaken, orcs swarm like a storm. Chaos waits, always watching, always scheming. And still, the Emperor holds the line. His power, unimaginable to mortals, flows endlessly to sustain the fragile heart of mankind. And perhaps, one day, he will awaken fully. When that happens, the galaxy will face a force that even the chaos gods will fear. But the question remains, lingering as it has for millennia: if the Emperor ever rises from the throne, will he save humanity, or will he judge it? That is the eternal enigma of the Emperor of mankind. He is the greatest protector humanity has ever known, the God who walks among mortals, the mind that has shaped the stars themselves. His story is one of sacrifice, power, and unending vigilance, a tale without true end. For as long as the galaxy turns, the Emperor endures. and in the darkness of a million worlds, his light still shines.